first, just now that it's been a few days, have you had the chance to kind of reflect on how this final series, how have things kind of played out, and I guess what is your reaction to it?
You know, I think, you know, the last 3 days have been incredibly difficult. You know, I'm not sure exactly when that's going to dissipate, but, you know, I think it's natural to go back and think through it. And obviously, everyone wants a clear-cut answer, and I think if you were to boil it down to its simplest form, in the regular season, we led baseball in every statistical category with runners in scoring position. In this series, we were not good. During the course of the season, you know, we had peaks and valleys with runners in scoring position, and this was a valley. The question is it baseball, or are there things we can do to improve upon that? Are there levers we can pull? Are there things to put us in a better position there? You know, obviously, we had 4-game stretches all during the year where we struggled, but in totality, we performed extremely well on that front. You know, we had more opportunities than they did. They cashed in at a higher efficiency than we did, and that's why they're playing tonight and why we're sitting here today. But, you know, I think trying to process all of it, you know, from my standpoint, is so much more about what's constructive, what is helpful. We have more time right now than we anticipated. You know, we weren't planning to start thinking about the 23 team until later. And so now the question is, how can we best use this time, use it wisely to do everything we can not to have this time next year.
You guys have quite a few free agents that are now on the market. How important is it whether to try to retain some of those guys, or do you think changes need to be made amongst the core group that you have?
I mean, I think you go back to, you know, our 17 team, our 18 team, our 2010. I think change is inevitable in team sports, so I do think that there's going to be some change. What exactly that looks like, I'm not sure right now. You know, again, we didn't anticipate having this time, and so now it's about really rolling our sleeves up and digging in for things we can learn from this year that will help us in the future, and also the best way to position ourselves to have the deepest and best team going into next year. And, you know, we're going to do our best to use that time wisely and do everything we can to, you know, pick ourselves off the ground and put the best team out there for next year.
And you just asked the question yourself, right? Is it just baseball, or are there things that you can do? It's kind of your gut, you know, reaction thoughts right now. Which one do you think it is?
I don't know the answer. I mean, I think it's probably a combination. You know, again, we went through 4-game stretches all year where we were, you know, the 27 Yankees were runners in scoring position. We went through 4-game stretches this year where we were on the other end of that continuum. You know, I felt like, you know, it's kind of taking each game separately. Game 1, I felt like for 3 innings, we were great. Those last remaining innings, we were not. Now we held on and won the game. In Game 2, I actually feel like we had really good at-bats. We had really good at-bats against Yu Darvish and their pen, and had a lot of different opportunities and some hard hit balls that found guys that didn't fall. I didn't feel that way in Games 3 and 4. And so how much of that is baseball in the natural course, and how much of it is, you know, other things. Again, so many of our guys have a lot of postseason experience. It's not being intimidated by the moment. You know, we had some untimely kind of injuries with Gavin Lux and JT, who were doing really well in September, had those injuries and came back and, you know, weren't quite right yet. But you can kind of go through all of it, and we will, and spend time on it. Just trying to find any levers or anything we can do to help put us in a better position next year.
I'm kind of wondering, you know, with as many teams that are tanking now, right? I think there was like a stretch maybe in the middle of the season, you guys weren't playing great, then, right? You go visit the Reds, and now all of a sudden like you're on a winning streak again. You mentioned Game 1, obviously that's the guy. right, in Clevenger, that they probably don't want out there, right? Coincidentally or not, that's the guy you guys hit. I don't know, is because of the way the competitive balance of the game is the way it is right now, do you think that that can be, the regular season can be kind of misleading in a way, or at least in regards to?
Because I think everyone, it's all relative. And other good teams also played all the other teams. And I feel like against good teams and good pitching, we performed near the top in general. We played against those Padres pitchers a lot. And we had a worse string of at-bats during these 4 games than we did in the, during the regular season. And how much of that is them adapting to something, how much of it is us being slow reacting, how much of it is batted ball luck, how much of it is, not handling moments. I mean, there's all kinds of different things and to dig into, and we're going to. A lot of times, firm answers are hard to come by. We want clear answers and things that, do everything, help us in, figuring out how to do things better the following year. Sometimes it's easy to do, and sometimes it's not. And digging in on why we didn't cash in on those opportunities is not the easiest thing, but we're going to spend time and be as thoughtful as we can.
Obviously, I get that, right, you got to get to the playoffs first. You have to get through kind of a 6-month regular season. But if you were to say, just kind of in a bubble, in a vacuum, able to construct a team just for the playoffs, how much would that differ from the team that you've constructed, like say after the winter going into a season? And is there a way you think maybe kind of bridging those two things if they are different?
I mean, I guess a different way to answer that, if you're asking me if I think the best team wins the World Series every year, I would say no. I think the hottest team wins the World Series every year, and so it's how to put us in the best position going into October to be the hottest team. 2017, we went through that cold streak, we got hot, and we rolled through the playoffs until the World Series. 2020, each year has its own kind of different narrative to it, but I don't believe that the best team wins the World Series every year. I think that's
Are those, I guess, are they two different things though, right? There's a best team over like a 6-month thing, and maybe a best team for a tournament. Like, in your mind, are those two the same thing?
I guess my point is that, I guess partly is how you define best team, but again, I think it is about the hottest team. I think you can look at, after a series and say, oh, this team played better, and that's true. They played better than we did. That's not in dispute. But how much of it, how much of it are things you can foresee in advance as opposed to after the fact? I think that's a really important distinction. I feel like the expectations here are incredibly high, and that's awesome. I love how passionate our fans are. Those expectations are shared by everyone that works here. In the front office, in the coach's room, Dave, our players. I personally don't think the criticism that Dave has received has been fair. I think it's human nature to want to point the finger at someone. And I feel like this was an organizational failure in the postseason. I feel like, our regular season goal, we accomplished. We put ourselves in the very best position you can to go out and win 11 games in October. We didn't come close to doing that. And I think there are fairly clear answers as to why, and others that aren't as clear. But I think, that passion is awesome and love it. But I feel like all of us are incredibly disappointed, and at least the way my mind works is taking this moment, learning what we can from what has happened, and doing everything we can to avoid this going forward. Now, getting back to your point, what can we do going into hopefully put ourselves in a position to play in October next year? And then once we're able to accomplish that, how do we put ourselves in the best position to be the hottest team during that stretch? I don't know the answer to that, but we'll definitely spend time trying to figure it out.
This isn't like track and field or boxing, right, where you...
Do you want to talk after?
Where you're kind of peaking for like a particular event, right? Boxing, they have like an 8-week training camp, or track and field, you kind of train according to, calendar, whatever. So given, right, and obviously, no one's been able to kind of figure that out, right? Over the years, there's been things that go in cold and get hot, whatever.
Right.
Does it feel at this point
lost
that...
a lot of games in the regular season, and then came in and now, have put themselves in a position to be in the NLCS. So it's easy after the fact, but before would you have said, hey, they're going to do this? No, because it's easy after the fact to say, okay, here's how they've played, here's what they've done with runners in scoring position, here's how they've handled different moments. Yeah, and there's no secret why they are where they are right now.
So do you feel like you just got unlucky?
We gotta move on to someone else.
Again, I answered this very clearly for you. If you want me to answer it again, I will. I don't know the answer in terms of how much of it is just baseball and how much of it is other things that, we could potentially control. And, an example is in the 7th inning, Will Smith hits that ball 100 miles an hour that happens to go to profile and not to his right or left. And Kim hits a ball, into the ground that happens to, because Muncie's playing up, go down the line. Like, had it been this far, much further over, it's a double play. So those things are what we both love about the game and can drive you crazy when you're on the other side of it. So how much of that is luck, how much of that is skill, how much of that is preparation, all great questions for us to debate ad nauseum.
Okay. In hindsight, is there anything, when you look at that 7th inning in particular, you guys would have done differently there?
Yeah, in hindsight, we would have done it totally different.
But I think obviously when
We would have positioned Trace a little differently. On Grisham's ball, we would have had Muncie play the line a little bit more.
But with the planning, like when you don't use Phillips and you have, you make a lot of decisions there, is that something you look at as, there's been kind of instances of this in years past where there's probably decisions that change in those spots and how you go about it in the regular season? Is that something that you kind of look at as a common theme here with some of these?
No, again, I think after a loss, there are narratives formed about what happened, and I get that. Every day is a series of narratives, both positive and negative, but come as a result of what happened, and I totally understand that. I think that there are decisions that are 50-50 or 55-45, and if those moves would have worked, they would have gotten praise for them. Like, definitionally, if that's the case, which I genuinely believe is to be the case, it's hard on the other side to be too critical. You can say, hey, it would have been great if you had done something different with the benefit of hindsight. It's a hard thing when, like, in that moment, I think you could passionately argue different sides. And so many decisions like this don't have a clear right or wrong answer until after it plays out.
You don't think that innings sped up on him, though?
Jeez, what?
You don't think that innings sped up on him?
I don't.
Especially in particular with like the Vessia thing.
I don't. I didn't know what happened with the first pitch, and then after it was a missed sign. Like, those things happened. I did not think that.
Do you know how that sign got missed yet?
I don't.
Wait, was this?
I'm not going to spend any time on that either. Like, getting into it like that.
But was this the most disappointing elimination you had here?
Yeah, probably. It's hard to, like, vividly remember each one because they're all terrible and devastating, and eventually you kind of pick yourself up and start to pour yourself into the next year. I felt way worse Sunday than I expected, and I expected low, and it hasn't quite hit an upswing yet, but it will at some point.
Great.
Andrew, we talk about analytics during the regular season and how well they worked, 111 games. Do you guys change your way of thinking when it comes to analytics for the postseason, maybe taking into consideration emotion or things like that? Like, help us explain how that works.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what analytics means, because it means something different to different people. I mean, from our standpoint, it's about being prepared. And it's about having scouting reports on the opposing players. It's about understanding their strengths and their weaknesses. It's about matching up our players' strengths against the other team's weaknesses. So I think it means different things to different people, but from that standpoint, it's about, like, everything is a series of kind of individual events that happens in a baseball game. And it's about trying to have the odds as much in our favor in every move that we can, as much as we can. And, you know, when a game starts, we have a lineup that we pick to face their pitcher, they have a lineup that they pick to face our pitcher, and then after, so there's the series of kind of individual battles, and then from there, it's our guys are picking relievers to come in and face their hitters, knowing they might hit, and it's just how to match up our guys' strengths against their weaknesses as much as possible. And I think it's similar in that that's the best way for me, whether you cared enough about a spring training game, whether it's a regular season game, or whether it's Game 7 of the World Series, is to constantly try to put your players in the best position to succeed, which in turn gives you a better chance of winning. So that's how it kind of lands with me, but I think it means something different to different people.
All right.
Andrew, just also out of that 7th inning, really the pitching plan in Game 5 and 4 in general, another narrative is who makes those decisions? How much is it pregame?
Is that really a narrative?
I mean, part of it's like who's
After every single postseason, I've answered that question, so I don't feel like it is a narrative, only based on like the question at the end of it that keeps coming out.
So does Dave make that decision? To put it to both
100%.
Tyler Anderson and put
100%, and we've answered this a lot of times. I'd really like not to answer it. Well, next year, hopefully, it's after a parade. But it's been very clearly answered here a lot of different times. If it ever changes, I'll let people know. I don't think it ever will, but if it ever does, I will let people know.
and then also, it seems like Dave's coming back. Can you confirm that?
Go.
Dave is coming back.
100%.
Okay. What do you make of the fact that teams in the past have made changes even after a successful season just because they need to change the voice? They need to change the voice in the clubhouse after some disappointment.
Yeah.
So this year it worked for the Phillies, they don't work with other teams. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I understand that. I don't feel like that's what we need. Again, if we felt like a different voice was going to help us cash in on those situations with runners in scoring position, yeah, then maybe we would. But again, some of, you know, again, if Will Smith's ball's 3 feet to Profar's left or right, it clears the bases as opposed to being a sac fly. I mean, there are those things that take place in the course of a game that I think it's important to tease out, like what part of it is baseball and what part of it is leadership. And I feel like Dave and his coaching staff did an incredible job to lead this team during the regular season to 111 wins. And I don't feel like it was a switch they then turned off, or the players got, you know, needed a different voice in those games. That's my personal belief, but I get that there are differing opinions on this, on a lot of different things, and appreciate that.
And then you mentioned changing levers, changing the pieces. Does that include coaching staff at all?
No, I don't anticipate it right now.
Dave.
Andrew, I have a question about somebody that actually played in the game. Mookie Betts, the last month of the season, was a 200 hitter, OPS not even at 600. David said on multiple occasions during the year that the offense goes as Mookie goes. How much of this, and only winning one game in this series, falls on his lack of production?
Yeah, again, that's in results, because if you go back and watch those 4 games, he hit some balls hard that got caught. If you want to point at like somebody, like he's really good at looking over a baseball, there were a few called strikes that weren't strikes. Again, that's baseball. It's not something that, but I think it's hard to isolate it down and say that he didn't, because I think there was some really good at-bats and some really good contact that happened to be at guys, coupled with looking over balls in ways, so I don't pinpoint any of it on him personally.
But from the standpoint of not only him, but some of your guys, from the day that you guys clinched, there were symptoms that they were not hitting on all cylinders. Did you see that, or is that just on the surface?
No, I mean, I think so. I think, again, Gavin had the neck thing, JT had the leg thing. We had guys dealing with stuff, some that were still playing and some that sat out for a period, and that happens. And so we, tried everything we could to get guys in the best position going into October. With some guys we were able to, and with some guys we weren't.
Did you feel like your players were too comfortable playing the Padres, that they had dominated them not only this year, but the period of time that they've all been here? Did you feel like they took the Padres for granted?
I didn't feel that way. And watching them prepare and go about it, I did not feel that way. I think it is easy and kind of a lazy narrative after the fact to say that was the case. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe I was too close to it. I don't know, but it did not land with me in that way at all.
Yeah, Andrew, do you feel like in retrospect you guys did enough at the deadline? Because Gallo didn't have a single plate appearance at DS.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we came into this postseason, we felt like we had, in our minds, obviously we're biased, the most talented team. So, we would have traded a lot for a guy if you would have told me, hey, he's going to get a hit every time with the runner in scoring position. We would trade a lot for that player. I felt like it wasn't from a lack of talent in October.
This may be a difficult question to answer. Like, is there a way to sort of combat like the volatility that you guys have had in our scoring position? I'm sure that's something that you'll get into now, but like there's a stretch in San Francisco where Dave sort of criticized some of the approach stuff. You mentioned that game 3 and 4 it slid. Is there a way to sort of minimize that volatility?
I don't know. I mean, I think you go through all 30 teams, or you take the best teams and the playoff teams and you look at it, there is that. Some of it is batted ball luck. Some of it can be approach. Some of it can be a pitcher happen to really execute that at bat. Like when a pitcher really executes, the hitter's almost always out. And so it gets down to that as well. Like how well does that pitcher execute in that at bat? That all those things together, I think, makes it hard to have just a very steady line in terms of what your production is in those moments. But obviously, anything we can do to improve it, even on the margins, is worth it.
And the last winter, you last year added Friedman, Trey Turner's free agent this winter. Do you anticipate needing to add another star level bat if he does leave?
I don't know. I mean, right now, again, we didn't expect to be diving into the offseason and 23 team right now. But as I said earlier, we're going to do everything we can to use this time as wisely as possible and be more prepared, or be as prepared as we can be, to not be sitting here having this press conference in the middle of October next year.
Andrew, I know it's hard to compare senses of disappointment, but does it feel like more big things were out of your control this year, whether it's the layoff prior to the division series while the Padres have been games, or regular season opponents, straight games against the Rockies, or being geofenced out of Petco Park so your fans can't show up? Were there more meaningful things out of your control?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, again, I think it boils down to us not getting hits in those situations, and whether any of that led to it, I don't necessarily think so, but, again, I think speaks to the difficulty of trying to answer that. I don't know the answer.
Are there any players who will be reporting to spring training saying they had an off-season procedure of some sort?
Not sure yet, but if it does happen, we will let you guys know.
In real struggles, taking him out of the closer role, not having a true closer for that, final month and any postseason and that changing, and then in terms of the offseason, how much of a priority or concern will you guys deal with in addressing that?
Yeah, I think we felt like our collective pitching staff was as talented as we've ever had here. Really like the different weapons and abilities that our relievers had. So, having a traditional closer wasn't something that's front of mind. If you think that it's a really talented group that is all prepared to pitch in any situation, which allows, the doc and the coaching staff to put them in the best situations when it calls upon, rather than going any by any.
Yeah, any regrets not adding a starting pitcher at the deadline?
Again, I think spent a lot of time during the deadline, some things that happened, a lot of things that didn't. That's the same every trade deadline. You know, we are tasked with doing everything we can to win in that current year, but also to maintain our future outlook. If a deal would have made sense, we would have said yes to it on a number of different fronts. So no, I don't regret not doing a bad deal for us. I don't regret that. And again, I don't feel like it was our starting pitching or our pitching in general that is the reason that we're sitting here today. And felt like Brandon just said, that our 1 through 13, I feel like this was the deepest that we've had and the most talented with differing looks and, you know, options to navigate different lineups. And, you know, we felt really good about the talent that we had down there.
What would you say to fans who have endured as many years as this as you have, a lot more years? They want something done. They want somebody, the fans frankly want somebody fired, they want some changes. Jorge mentioned the staff, front office, something. What do you say to those fans who are begging to see something different that can happen to change the outcome next year?
Again, I think the passion that they have is shared. You know, the expectations that they have are shared. The disappointment that we all feel today is shared. I think, you know, it's just the way I personally see the world is for everyone that we work with that pours themselves into this also feel that same way, and it's us collectively trying to learn what we can from what has happened and putting ourselves in the best position to avoid it going forward. Again, I feel like if, you know, the vast majority of the time, if the best team just always won the World Series, and this happened to be an example of not, then I think it's easier to, you know, point fingers and isolate why. Some of it comes down to what happens in the crazy tournament that is the playoffs of baseball. And it cuts both ways. It's exhilarating and awesome when it works out, and it is crushing when it doesn't. And to me, that has as much to do with the beauty of this game than it does. I just don't see the world in terms of putting fingers and firing someone for those reasons. Now, I think as a group, if we're not constantly trying to get better, even if we won it all this year, I think the mindset of always trying to improve what we do is shared among everyone we work with, then those are people that I very much believe in figuring this out with together.
With regards to the runners in scoring position thing, how do you fix that? Is this a mental thing or is this a mechanical thing?
Well, again, during the regular season, we led in every category with runners in scoring position. So I don't think it's something that gets into a mental thing. You know, there were 4-game stretches where we were elite. There were 4-game stretches where we weren't. I don't know the answer to, you know, how much of it was it being the playoffs. But again, if we had a bunch of inexperienced guys in the playoffs, I think it's a fairer question of that. But with the experience these guys have, I think it mitigates that some. But I think a lot of our time and energy is going to be spent on, are there things we can do to improve it on the margins? Are there levers we can pull to do whatever we can to increase our chances next year?
Brandon, it's been 3 seasons, regular seasons now, but Cody just hasn't been the guy from 2019. Obviously, he's a lead defender, and you guys have been able to absorb, you know, his offensive struggles. Does that equation change at all going into this offseason? Can you absorb, you know, paying him $18 million or whatever it is next year, and you anticipate him returning next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was, Andrew touched on it before, like we haven't spent much time on that at all. Unfortunately, that's just not something we've discussed much internally. You know, obviously, Belly's had spurts of being really successful throughout the season. His elite defense has continued to be there, and we still think that there's upside. So those are discussions that we're going to have moving forward as we look into what 2023 looks like.
Do you guys plan to pick up Justin Turner's option?
Again, all kind of personnel things for us. We're gonna spend more time on. He's been a huge part of our success. Been right in the thick of, everything for as long as I've been here. But answering definitively about what next year's team is gonna look like is just really difficult right now. We're gonna take time and meet as a group and really get into those things. We're just not prepared at this point.
And does the outcome of the Bauer deal, will that have any impact financially on what you guys are able to do this winter?
I mean, as long as I've been here, our ownership group has been incredibly supportive of doing anything and everything to reward our fans' passion and do everything from their standpoint, to put us in a position to go out and win a championship, and I don't anticipate that changing.
One more, Kirsten.
Just quickly, Andrew, considering how this playoff structure has played out in a sense, with the wild card teams being the hotter teams kind of going through, obviously we've got sort of Yankees or the Guardians, kind of see how that one plays out. But how are you guys looking at this now playoff structure and kind of using that to prepare for next season, and just seeing if that changes your approach in any sense?
I mean, we'll still be gunning for the 1 seed. We won't be gunning to be a wild card team. We spend very little time thinking about, well, what could be different? How would you structure it, as opposed to this is what it is and let's operate within it and do the best we can. And so I can confidently sit here and say that our goal next year will be to be the number 1 seed. And do everything we can to then win 11 games.
Yeah, Andrew, is this level of spending you guys are at sustainable, or do you feel like you might have to make some adjustments in the next couple of years just to sort of continue this sort of sustainable you guys are trying to?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this over the years. We never view payroll in 1-year increments. We always view it over kind of a rolling time period. And there are times where our payrolls are higher. There's times where it's not as high. And a lot of that times with our farm system and when young players are coming up, and because the number one thing for Mark Walter and our ownership group is do everything we can to go out and win a World Series. So sometimes, as part of the transition that happens on rosters over a 3 to 5 year period, young players get integrated onto the roster, and by definition, payrolls come down some when that happens, depending on how many. And we have a number of really talented minor league players right now at the upper levels, and part of our focus this offseason will be how many to look to integrate early in the year, how many of them will kind of serve as depth throughout the year, get some experience, and then be part of the core going forward. All are things that we're going to have to work through this offseason.
And this sort of falls into the personnel bucket, but last year when Clayton was still making his decision, he decided not to give him a qualifying offer. Do you anticipate having a similar sort of path as he sort of decides if he wants to play next year?
I mean, from my standpoint, nothing has changed in that my strong hope is that Clayton Kershaw is pitching here next year, but like I said last year, I think for him to take the time and put his head together with Ellen and figure out what makes the most sense for their family is what we're going to afford them the time to do. And whether it's a decision that they make quickly or it takes some time, I'm not sure of that right now. But as we learn that and get a sense, we'll have a better feel for how we're going to handle everything.
We have to reset your salary cap in the.
What we have to?
Well, yeah, we have to.
No, there are benefits to doing it, but we will not have to.
You mentioned kind of the margins. I'm just kind of wondering, like in your 8 years here, I think it's been 8 years, right? As the game as a whole has gotten smarter, how much harder has it become to kind of maybe find those guys kind of that can help you on the delivery, if at all?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that. Just being so mired in it, I don't necessarily have perspective, but I feel like the group that works together in this organization to do everything we can to go out and win, I'm biased, but I feel like it's the best of baseball. And I feel like there's a level of curiosity that exists among the group of trying to figure out ways to improve. And I don't think that would change or be different even if we won the World Series this year. And so I think we're constantly always trying to figure out ways to get better. Some of it is more obvious with specific players, and sometimes it's something more process related that's less obvious, but always striving to improve what we do.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.